Good afternoon, everyone. This is the March 16th, 2023 Zoning Board of Adjustment regular meeting. My name is Matt Perry, and I'm chair of this board. I will now call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll so that we may verify the presence of quorum.
Board Member Callahan.
Present.
Grants Korsch.
Present.
Hutchins.
Here.
Ingram.
Here.
Johannesson.
Aye.
Perry.
Here.
Softly is absent. Smikarova is absent. Wang.
Here.
We have 7 members present.
Okay, so let the record show we have quorum. And with that, we'll proceed to our agenda, a copy of which was posted for public access to the city's legislative information management system, available at lims.minneapolismn.gov. Is there a motion to approve this agenda? It's moved. Is there a second? It's seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye. Any against indicate by saying nay. And that motion passes and the agenda is approved. Hearing none, all in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye. Any against, say nay. Any abstentions? There's one abstention. And with that, the motion passes and the minutes from the Zoning Board of Adjustment March 2nd, 2023 meeting are approved. Mr. Ellis, are there any petitions or communications?
2 communications this evening. One of them is that the next meeting of the Zoning Board of Adjustment will be canceled. We do not have any applications at this time, any complete applications at this time. So the next meeting was April, say 20th, I believe.
Yep.
Is the next official meeting, regular meeting of the board. Also, we did receive an appeal of 223 40th Street East. The gentleman is not appealing every decision of the board, obviously did not appeal the approval of the impervious surface, but is not appealing the retaining wall, only the fence height. He has proposed some modifications where he's going to create a tiered system back off the property line, and then but still would be required to have a shorter fence and would like to do a privacy fence, but it'll be farther into the yard off there. I don't know the exact distance. I know he's been working with the planner, Alex Kohlhaas, on that, but that's the current proposal, would be just an appeal of the fence height denial.
Right. And is your practice, you will, upon the decision of the Biz Committee and the City Council, come back and tell us what the results are?
Yes, I will. Chair Perry, I will.
Okay.
And just as a note, it will be going to the April 18th Biz Committee rather than the March 28th. It's being pushed off a cycle just due to some scheduling issues and whatnot. It was recommended by the clerk's office that if we can push an item off to the April 1 rather than this, to do so. So we've done that.
Okay. Are there any questions? Yes, Ms. Grant-Coles.
I'm curious, are we allowed to speak at that meeting, or are we allowed to talk to the city council folks about that issue as a private citizen or as a person on the board? I mean, obviously, as a private citizen, I would have been allowed, but I'm on the board, so am I allowed or not allowed?
Yeah. Well, Chair Perry, Board Member Grants Korsch, I guess I would say, I mean, as a private citizen you are, as a board member, your sort of role in this is done as a delineating body. As a private citizen, I suppose you could. Normally the people speaking to a specific issue are people who live in the surrounding area who are notified, et cetera, although we do, for larger sorts of issues, do see people, contact that. I guess I would say, in terms of speaking, at the public hearing, you're able to. There's nothing that would prevent you from doing that. I would say reaching out to an elected official. They are, because this is a quasi-judicial decision-making, they really can't have any sort of discussion related to that that's not part of the public hearing, since they will have to decide one way or the other on that approval or denial. I don't know which way the committee will go, but
I'm sorry, I'm kind of dense sometimes and I can't always understand things. I want to make real clear. I can speak at the public meeting, but I am instructed that it is inappropriate for me to talk to the political officials.
Yes, because it could be construed as ex parte
Thank you.
communication.
Okay,
Yes.
just want to be
For the
clear.
political officials, but yes, you could speak at the public.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
And Ms. Grants-Korsch, typically, if there's any communication on behalf of the board at a meeting like that, the chair would make that communication.
But I'm not asking,
Yep, I know, I'm just emphasizing that.
got it.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, any other questions? Mr. Ellis? I see none. Thank you. All right, let's review the agenda. I'll read the agenda number and address of the project and state whether it's slated for consent, continuance, withdrawal, return, or discussion. I'll just quickly cover what consent items are. These are items that will be passed without discussion by the board. We will be adhering to staff recommendation found on your agenda under the items recommended motion section, and any applicable conditions will be listed in the same section. If you agree with this recommendation, including any applicable conditions, you need to do nothing, and the board will pass it as recommended. After the item is passed on consent, you're free to leave the chambers. Please check in with the staff member assigned to that item if you have any questions following the decision. If you disagree with the recommendation, please indicate you'd like to speak against that item when I ask, and we'll put it on the discussion agenda. So we have one land use request before us tonight. It's agenda item number 5. It's 1300 Godward Street Northeast. Staff is recommending this item for consent. Is there anyone who'd like to speak against this item? Or would any board member like to pull it? I see no one. And that concludes our land use request items. So now we'll go on to reviewing items on the agenda for consent. There, item number 5. Is there a motion to adopt this item on consent?
Second.
It's moved and seconded. All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any against indicate by saying nay. Any abstentions? That motion passes. So if you're here for item number 5, your land use request is approved. Good luck with your project, and thanks for coming down. Okay. We have some old business, and that's our annual report. Has everybody had a chance to look at it? Are there any questions of Mr. Ellis? I think we had one written piece of feedback from Mr. Softly.
Yes, Chair Perry. Vice Chair Softly did have a couple of comments just in terms of the phrasing around it and also having us double check the dates, and there were some inconsistencies in the dates. So actually, it turns out that I believe it was, I can't remember if, I believe it was Board Member Softly who had Sean Cahill's original start date accidentally in there for some reason, I think is what had happened. It was just like transposed over. So, it's been a while there. So, but that we think we've corrected all the issues on that. And that amended report will be available. So,
Okay. Does anybody else have anything that they would like to see in the report or amendments to it? Ms. Callahan, you had a comment before the meeting, or a question.
Okay. Thank you for the staff for putting together this report. It was really interesting as a new board member to see all the work that the board has done over the last year. One of the questions I had was about, I know that the land use rezoning study is underway, and wanting to know what percentage of cases that the board heard last year would have been approved by right under the zoning amendments being proposed as part of this reuse study. And I know that that might be a question, you might not have that right now, but I would love to be able to know that information or include it in the report in some way.
okay. Yeah, Chair Perry, Board Member Callahan, that we can certainly look into that. I know most of them, we're not proposing. Most of the land use rezoning study isn't affecting a lot of what would be impacted by what the Board of Adjustment sees. There could be some issues related to tweaking setback distances, et cetera. So there could be situations in that. I think there may be some changes to interior side yard setbacks proposed, but for the most part, setbacks for regular residential properties that will be in the urban neighborhood, as it's called now, versus just residential, will remain largely the same. So it might not be too many, to be honest, but we can certainly check into that.
Yeah, I just asked because I'm curious to see like how much the decisions that this board is making are impacting the sort of policies that, and the study that is underway.
Certainly, yeah.
So is that something you'd like to see in this report or next year's report?
I think next year's
reflecting that?
report would be great. I don't know that it's needed for this report. I personally would like to know that information, whether that board feels like it's appropriate to include in the report, that I leave that up to the board. Something I'm personally interested in, just to see what pieces are changing based on our decisions.
Certainly, and I would like to say that with the adoption of the built form overlay districts, again, most of the built form for the lower density residentials remained pretty much the same, but there were changes to implement the built form for larger sites. There has been some reporting, I don't know the exact numbers, but the City Planning Commission saw quite a few a large reduction in variances just because staff is unable to, recommend approval on some of these variances anymore. And, one of the points of that was to create a more, I don't want to say streamlined, but more cohesive understanding of the built environment and what could or could not be built, and reset expectations to developers that you're not going to be receiving variances and whatnot. You still may have site plan reviews, et cetera, but variances are still granted. I think it only went down by 25% or so from the prior year, but that was still a substantial drop for the Planning Commission. Our numbers dropped slightly. The board's numbers, I mean, you can see in the report, I went from, I think we had 96 last year and 111 the year prior, but that can be just explained by randomness rather than any sort of actual change that would allow people to do things as of right. I know, though, however, there are people waiting for some tweaks to that would reduce it. One proposal that we have in the land use rezoning study would eliminate the front yard variance where we're trying to do it, so currently a side yard can go up or back, a non-conforming one if at least 3 feet off the property line. We're proposing a similar thing that you can just go straight up off the front, since that's generally granted every time. I think there's only been one semi-contentious one where somebody was out farther than the remainder of the houses on the block and was doing off the enclosed porch in the front. To go straight up versus the house, and I know staff had recommended denial on that one a few years back, and the Board of Adjustment did grant that variance.
So maybe I can recommend a compromise that staff come back with that information separately, and it be included in next year's report, but we approve this year's report as is. Does that sound fair enough?
Yep, that sounds good.
Okay. Is that something that you can accomplish,
Yes, sir.
getting that material?
Yes, we'll be able to, we can do an analysis of the prior year's work. The unfortunate thing is we won't be able to do an analysis of things that didn't happen as a result, even though we're aware that the example I just gave, we'll see fewer variances related to that. So we may see, another drop on it where it makes sense logically to not have, require a variance for something that, if it's routinely granted, that's where we have our kind of policy changes where
Sure.
right, this is wasting everyone's time, so.
Okay. And quick comment related to that. I know in 2022, we had a couple of issues that came up where there were board comments, including myself, about how our board was probably not the best forum for their needs. I mean, it would be interesting to see coverage of that in some way. I don't know how we would do it, if we would comb or quantify these things as it comes up, but it would be interesting to use that information to uncover some of the gaps, whether it's, public education or going back to what you said about it's just, simply kind of a time waster.
Yeah, and there's that, and then, just sort of as a note, sometimes it's, if something's already been done, they're going, like somebody will usually pursue the variance first just because, versus automatically tearing out something. So if something came out of enforcement, they're more likely to proceed regardless of staff recommendation, just because, it's worth the shot to just pay the money and hope, you know, try to make a good argument and hopefully get your approval versus, you know, just if you asked on the front end, the answer is no, and we would strongly discourage them from doing it. And, you know, from even recommending, or we do discourage applicants on something we know we can't recommend approval on. Everyone's always able to apply for a variance, but we'll discourage an applicant when we say, you know, staff is not going to be able to recommend approval of this, et cetera. And sometimes we can point to certain types of variances that have never been granted, to my knowledge, certain things like egress window wells, and there's fence variances have been approved, but they are much, much harder to get than most types of variances. It's hard to prove a practical difficulty, so show a practical difficulty.
So how are you feeling about this report as is?
Yeah, I like the additional recommendation about some of the new built form Wormley, but yeah, I'm pretty
Okay.
content with it. I was just curious.
Yeah, no, that's a good suggestion. And so I think maybe what we can do is if staff can be on the lookout over the course of the next year for when those things come up where we're saying this is really not the purview of this board, I think that is important. And being able to point to that, as Ms. Wang is saying, to people who are seeking variances, they can look in the report and see this is not the best place, the best route to go. Ms. Grants-Korsch?
Yeah, I'm just curious about the history, if you don't mind indulging me. Only 3 people went on to appeal the process. Is that sort of typical? I mean, I know that there's never a typical year, but,
Yeah.
you know, it was just sort of interesting that seemed, to me, that was a very small amount, and I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, Chair Perry, Board Member Grants-Korsch, I don't know the exact appeal rate. It is fairly low.
Okay.
But I guess that, I have to go back through and look at prior annual reports, but I would say on average, I think it's low, to be honest. I think we usually would see 6 to 10 a year with slightly more applications. Then again, we had 96 versus 111 versus 120 the year prior that, you know, can create some different things. And it also depends on the type of applications we're seeing. You know, we're trying to streamline it to the point where, you know, obviously we don't want to see variances if possible, but obviously there are, you know, we do have to see them sometimes because there needs to be an outlet for the code where allowed. But, you know, we're also trying to tweak it to make sure that we're balancing the needs of the public and the needs of maybe an individual property owner or other development rights within a property. But yeah, appeals of denials, there were a few last year. I would just say I was surprised that they did not appeal, that we believed that they were going to appeal and they just decided not to. One of the ones this year that was appealed and withdrawn, for example, was the fence height variance of the union building, police and fire union building, that was appealed, but then they withdrew their application prior to going to Biz committee. So I'm not sure how we'll weigh that as an appeal since it was withdrawn. I mean, it technically wasn't appealed since no decision was made at the Biz, even though we have a documentation of an appeal. So it, you know, kind of.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Johannesson and then Mr. Ingram.
Look at the report? Is there some way to track how many people open it up or download it?
Chair Perry, Board Member Johannesson, I can check with the clerk's office. I believe either the clerk's office or IT can tell us page views for an individual thing. I would imagine it's not too large, but.
Agreed. I'm curious. I'm more curious.
But they can do individual page views and get an idea.
Mr. Ingram?
Yeah, no, I'm a little bit interested on page 2. I mean, I think it's good. I really don't have anything to complain about for this year, but in the future, I would love to see where they have the number of acted items by ward, to also have the percentage there, to see how many were approved by ward as well.
Okay.
I'm interested in that piece of information.
Is that something that we can change for this time around? Approve it and approve it with
I
that
guess,
change?
yeah, I mean, technically, I guess you could approve, like, I don't really want to put it out, it's like, I mean, I guess you could adopt with that recommended change, and then we could tweak from there before it gets posted.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes.
I wanted to build off of Board Member Ingram's comment around the ward breakdown, which I agree is very interesting, and I would love to also see the approve and denial rates. In addition to that, I would be curious to see what the variance types that came in before this board in terms of were the majority of them in specific wards by setback or by parking? Like, just curious to see if there's a trend that we're seeing in specific neighborhoods.
Yeah, that analysis, I mean, we can do, I mean, that might be a little more difficult, but we probably could because, I mean, we do break it down by type, but it's not type by ward necessarily then. One of the problems that we have is like it basically is a manual thing for us. There's no data pulling, and we just go into the actual things, and then a staff member, in this case. Oh, and that's one thing, and I forgot last time, and I do not want to forget this time. They're not here, but I would very much like to thank Sarah Roman, Christopher Koda, and Alyssa Brandt on our staff for putting it together. Chris did half the analysis, Sarah did half the analysis on some of the writing, and Alyssa created all the maps for us, so. Sorry, I got sidetracked on that, but what was the question again? I apologize.
Oh, about whether or not we could add, for the ward map, if there's a way to also break it down by what type of variance came before this board.
Yes, we could probably, what we'll do is just analyze and just note by ward, and then that could probably be mapped or charted or graphed.
Yeah, I think just, obviously, I don't know, I mean, personally, I don't feel like we need a full breakdown of these are all the different types of variances that came in each ward, because some of these have like 2. But I think if there's like a majority of cases in specific wards tended to be X or Y type, like that I think would be interesting for us to know, just in terms of what types of things are coming before this board.
Is that a change that you can do for this report?
I would like to postpone that to like maybe the next report.
Okay.
Bring back, just because the staff time it'll take, it would be nice to have that, that understanding on the front end versus on this.
Anyone else? So you've got some good feedback to work with, and Mr. Ingram has one change that I think you can do this year. So I would entertain a motion to approve the annual report with the amendment of Mr. Ingram's changes.
So moved.
It's moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion on it? Okay. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any against indicate by saying nay. And any abstentions? That motion passes, so the annual report is approved. We simply have to say that our next meeting is April 20th, 2023. And that is, as Mr. Ellis said, due to the fact that there weren't any items for our March 30th meeting. And that notification has gone out, as I understand it? Okay.
Yes, Chair Perry, the clerk's office has, through that notification, sent out the email blast and notice of cancellation.
Great. All right. Anyone want to move to adjourn?
So moved.
It's moved and seconded. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.
Do you need more information about organics recycling or have questions about how to watch a city council meeting? Minneapolis makes it easy.
How do I get more information about city services?
To get city information, you can call, text, or use the 311 app. Call through